Hello everyone, welcome to our Risk Management School. My name is Nicola Koser and I'm a member of the Pirani team. I'm excited to be here with you today to explore the theoretical and practical aspect of the different topics that we will see. To help us delve into this session, we're happy to have with us Alejandro Orrego, CEO at Pirani. Alejo, it's great to have you here with us. How are you?
Hi, Nicole. Hi, everyone. Thank you for inviting me.
Great, Alejo. And before we begin, I would love to invite everyone to continue learning about the world of risk management by visiting the Pirani Academy, when you will find valuable learning materials. I will leave the link in the chat now so you can see the website. Remember, if you have any questions during the webinar, please feel free to make them through the question and answer section. We will be happy to answer them at the end of this webinar. Now, let's begin with this exciting topic. Over to you, Alejandro.
Thank you, Nicole, and thank you for all the assistants that are joining right now. So it's like 2 months. The last month we haven't had this originally planned class, but here we are. So today we're going to talk about how to do risk mitigation. This is a topic that some of you put it in the survey that we launched at the end of the class. So thank you for the suggestion. So how can we try this subject? So remember that in my particular style, I always want to start from the risk management cycle that I think give us an idea of what the step we are in and what can we do next. So we always talk about the context and risk identification, then the risk evaluation, the risk treatment, the monitor and report, and continuous improvement. So what do you think? You can put it in the chat. In what step of this risk management cycle will be the risk mitigation? In what step do you think is the risk mitigation? You can put it in the chat or in the question and answer. So in the meantime, when you put, we can say, remember that in the last class, we talked about the emergent risk, and this is an important part of the first step of context and risk identification. So we talk about the pestle, the factors. So what information can I read to identify this risk? So that's what's part of the first step of context and risk identification. There's another step very important, that is the measure risk. So once I declare what risk can affect my company, then I need to measure or assess this specific risk. We talk about the impact and the likelihood, and we use the risk heat map to put my risks in maybe in the green, the yellow, or the critical area. And when I rate this risk in my or when I locate my risks in this risk heat map, I'm going to have the inherent risk. Right, so refer to the level of risk that exists in a process, activity, or system before any risk management or control measures are applied. So if you want to deep into this concept, we have a past risk management school, a past class. Nico can put it in the chat. Where can you access this class? So you can look for the class 2. The how to manage your organization risks is an interesting class to take in count. So the answer for the question before is, what is the risk mitigation? In what step of the risk management cycle is the risk mitigation? Definitely will be in the risk treatment. So once I have the inherent risk, when I declare the risk that I can affect my company, and when I put a rating on a measure of that specific risk, then came the risk mitigation. But the fifth thing I want to to clarify is the risk mitigation is not the only risk treatment that you can apply to a risk. Remember that we have 4 options. The first will be avoid. So this involves taking steps to eliminate the risks altogether. For example, if a company decides to avoid the risks of a certain product line, it may choose to discontinue that product line entirely. So remember, the risks really cannot be eliminated. Just going to avoid to step into this product or the line, or maybe you want to open a new market in a new city or country. To avoid the risk is not open that line or product or open that office in that specific market. So the risk is going to be there. You're just going to avoid that risk. The second one is in any order, but the second one in here is will transfer. So this involves transferring the risk to another party, such as insurance company. For example, a company may purchase insurance to transfer the risk of a natural disaster or other event that could result in financial losses. So if you hire an insurance company, usually is to transfer the risk. To accept is another one. This involves accepting the risk without taking any further action. This may be appropriate if the likelihood or impact of the risk are deemed to be low, or if the cost of mitigating the risk is greater than the potential impact. So imagine that in your risk heat map, your risk is located in the green area. So maybe you say, okay, you know what? I'm going to accept it. I'm not going to do anything with that risk because the impact will be minor and the likelihood is remote. So I need to focus on the maybe yellow, orange, or red area. So you can accept the risks because you cannot work on every risk that happened to you. But the first step will be mitigation. And again, this is not the only risk treatment that you can follow. So this involves taking steps to reduce the likelihood or impact of the risk. For example, if a company identifies a cybersecurity risk, it may implement additional security measures to reduce the likelihood of a cyber attack. So in today's class, we're going to talk only about mitigation. Okay, so there are 2 things, 2 main concepts that we can do to mitigate those risks. And the first is we're going to talk about controls, the risk management language. So in the context of risk management, controls refer to the measures and actions implemented to mitigate or manage risks within an organization. Controls are put in place to minimize the likelihood or impact of potential risks and ensure the achievement of objectives. Controls can take various forms, including policies, procedures, practices, guidelines, tools, technologies, and other mechanisms designed to identify, assess, monitor, and control risks. They act as a safeguard of countermeasures against potential threats or vulnerabilities. So yeah, basically when you identify a risk in your company, you may need to define controls that helps you mitigate that specific risk. So the control usually have 3 categories. So maybe a preventive control is that measures that implement to prevent risks from happening, to minimize the likelihood. Example includes access restrictions, training programs, segregation of duties, or physical security measures. So preventive controls minimize the likelihood, okay? Prevent the risk from happening. The detective controls are designed to identify risks or potential issues after they have occurred or are in progress. Examples include security monitoring system, regular audits, data analysis, and incident reporting mechanisms. And 3 corrective controls that is put in place to address and rectify risks or issues that have already occurred. They focus on minimizing the impact and restoring normalcy. Examples include backup and recovery system, incident response plans, and disaster recovery procedures. And also, we need to take in mind, and we need to consider that every control will have a robustness or an effectiveness. So there are controls that are stronger or higher, and another will be moderate, and another will be weak. So the ideal is not to create a single control for a single risk, because the ideal is that maybe you have a layer controls strategy to mitigate any specific risk. So maybe in this example, so what can I do to mitigate the risk? Maybe I need to create or implement controls. And the best way is to have layer control strategy. Maybe I have a preventive control, a corrective, a detective. So the more controls that I have, the more I'm going to mitigate that risk from happening. So in this specific example, maybe this will be the control one, and maybe we're going to mitigate the impact and the likelihood. Maybe will be detective, and in this case, maybe I have another one control that is preventive, that is mitigate the likelihood, and maybe I'm going to have another control that will mitigate the impact. So when I create control that helps me to mitigate or impact of likelihood and is preventive of detective, I'm gonna have this residual risk. So maybe the initial rating of the risk will be orange or high. And after the control one, for example, the residual risk is the level of the risk that remains after control or risk management strategy have been implemented to reduce the inherent risks of an activity, process, or system. So maybe in the first step, after I put the specific control to mitigate, in this case, both likelihood and impact, the risk, move into the green area. And maybe after I implement a second control, it's gonna move another quadrant in the risk heat map in order to have a risk from high or orange area to a green area. So this is basically the concept of the theory of the risk mitigation with controls. So would you say, okay, how do I know how much it will be moved, or how much it will be, from how do I know if this specific control will help me to displace from yellow or the green, or the orange area to the green one? So in this specific case, you will need the help of risk management software like Pirani, because of course in an Excel or in a spreadsheet, it will be difficult and very subjective. So the idea of how much it will move, it depends of how much it will mitigate the impact of livelihood, and if the control is strong, high, moderate, or weak. So in the practical class, we're going to show you how to rate the control in order to have a weak or a stronger control. So the tips to have good controls and to give you an idea if the control will be weak or strong, definitely will be conduct a comprehensive risk assessment. It clearly define the control objective. What do you want this control to do? What the control will mitigate, the likelihood, the impact, will be the effect on the risks that are you trying to address. Follow a risk-based approach, prioritize control based on a significance on likelihood or associated risk. 4, involve relevant stakeholders. Remember that the 3 lines of defense, the better you know the risks, the best ideas you have to implement or create controls, right? And 5, adopt a larger approach. Like I mentioned, maybe it is good to have a preventive, a corrective, a detective, or maybe 3, preventive, as many controls as you need to mitigate this specific risk. This is critical or red. 6, use industry best practices. For instance, if you're working with the ISO 27001, or maybe are you working with the information security best practices, like the ISO have a specific list of controls that you can apply, so you don't have to invent the wheel. They give you a list of 92 controls that you can implement in your company. That is very, very useful. And 7, ensure control feasibility. Remember, it is important that there's a lot of good practices and recipes, but if feasibility of implementing the control in your specific company, do you have the muscle to do that? So that's why in the, for example, the ISO 27001 controls, there is a statement of applicability. You need to reflect and to declare, okay, this control makes sense in the context of my company. Of course, you need to regularly review and update the controls, test and monitor controls, and foster a culture of risk awareness. That I think is the most important, because instill a risk-aware culture throughout the organization. Educate and train employees of risk management principles, their roles in control implementation. And so remember, this is a very useful thing. Like I mentioned, the controls of Annex A of information security in the version of 2022, there are 92 controls that gives you an idea. Okay, what can I implement in my company to mitigate the information security risk? So they are categorized in, for example, organizational controls, technology controls, that, for example, policies for information security. The control would be information security policy, and topic-specific policies shall be defined, approved by management, published, communicated, and acknowledged by relevant personnel and relevant interest parties. So even they give you the description of the control. And remember, the control usually have policies and procedures. If you want to know and deep a little bit more controls, we have another class in the risk management school. This will be the class 3 on how to create effective risk management controls. But remember, in today's class, we're going to talk about the more of the concept of risk mitigation. But because there's another concept in the risk mitigation that is not very clear in the risk management cycle, what a specific step it is, and it's the action plan. And some of the users and some of my clients usually ask me, maybe I already have the controls, or I already have the list of controls and best practices, but what are the role of action plans? Because, for example, in Pirani, we have the module and the item of action plans, and some users say, okay, so what are the action plans are for? And some of the theories say that maybe an action plan helps even the risk evaluation, the risk assessment, because sometimes we don't even have enough information to say, okay, this specific risk will be a critical impact or will be a minor likelihood. Because, for example, in emerging risks, we don't even know what the impact will be because it never happened to us, or even it never happened to the companies that I know or I work with. So sometimes action plans are even useful for the risk evaluation step. Of course, I think it will be very interesting and useful in the risk treatment. And I'm going to show you an example of this. And another thing is that definitely will be part of the continuous improvement. So, okay, what you already know of the controls and events and risk materialization, what you can do, and in the continuous improvement, it will be definitely helpful to have an action plan. So let's try a little bit deep in this action plan. So action plans, I'm going to put it like a treatment and a continuous improvement in the risk management cycle, and definitely are critical in risk management because outline specific steps to address identified risks. When risks are identified, simply acknowledging their existence isn't sufficient. You need to clear a clear strategy of how to mitigate or manage them effectively. Action plans provide this strategy. So here's why action plans are important. So one, mitigation, the class where what we're talking about is action plan outline proactive measures to reduce the probability, likelihood, or impact of identified risks. By implementing these measures, organization can minimize the likelihood and adverse events occurring. And if you, until here, you say, okay, so this is what controls do in theory. But action plans have another layers that also are very important. That the second is response. In the event that a risk materializes, an action plan provides guidance on how to respond swiftly and effectively. Having predefined steps can help mitigate the damage and facilitate a rapid recovery. And you may say, okay, we can also have a control for that. And three, accountability. Action plans assign responsibility for risk management tasks to specific individuals or teams within the organization. This ensures that everyone understands their role in managing risks and promotes accountability for implementing the necessary measures. So we definitely need this comparative. So that remember, this is the main two strategies to mitigate risk. Controls on one hand and action plan on the other hand. It's not a single recipe. It's not one by one. Remember that. So controls. Controls are mechanisms put in place to manage, mitigate, or eliminate risks. Remember, I just say that you cannot eliminate risk, you can mitigate, but sometimes, like avoiding AML, anti-money laundering, you cannot mitigate the risk. You need to avoid or eliminate some specific risk. That is what is like here. But they can include policies, procedures, processes, systems, or other measures that help prevent, detect, or correct problems. Remember the categories of controls. Controls can be part of an action plan, but they can also exist independently to manage ongoing risks in an organization's operations. Controls are more general and can encompass a broader range of risk management activities beyond specific action plans. For example, a control is to have information security policy. So you need to create the information security policy in your company, and you can say, okay, this specific policy will be preventive or corrective of detecting and link it to the risk. But how can I create the risk, the information security policy, if I haven't have any of that? So that will be the action plan came in. So action plans are specific strategies or sets of activities designed to address particular risks. They outline what needs to be done, who is responsible, and when it should be done. That's the main difference. And again, we're going to give you an example in the practical class in 3 minutes. So, and how it will be accomplished. Action plans are often created in response to identify risks or as a part of risk treatment strategy. So remember that you can put an action plan even in the risk evaluation step of the risk management cycle. So until here, we have two main strategies or two main assets to do the risk treatment that we're talking about. controls and action plans. Because in some ideas or methodology is just controls is for mitigate risk. Remember, action plans are important. And also, if you want to dip a little bit into the action plans, we have another class in the risk management school, will be specifically the class 5, that is about continuous improvement through action plans and assessments. So we have a specific class to dive into action plans for continuous improvement. But remember that today we're talking about risk mitigation. So I want to give you an example before to go directly to the software. So remember that in the last class, we talked about a risk workflow that you can follow to give you an idea. So maybe remember that we're talking about emerging risks, that we have the pestle sources of factors like political, economical, social, technological, environmental, legal, will be the cause of a risk. And maybe we also will have the consequence of the risk from happening. And we definitely have this risk can affect the company's processes. And then we can create a control to treat the risk if I want to mitigate. And also we have an event that will be the risk materialization of the risk that will affect the process of the company. And then we can have action plans to help me understand the risk, or maybe to deep into the control to fortify the control. And maybe I want to have an action plan to understand or to mitigate or correct the event that already happened. And even we can have an action plan to have more information in the process. Maybe the documentation of the redaction of the process wasn't sufficient enough. So maybe I want to have an action plan to improve the process. So that's why it's important in the continuous improvement. So as you can see, action plans are wider in the risk workflow. So let's put this in a specific example to follow an example that we saw in the last class of risk of emerging risks. So let's translate this in an actual example. So maybe and let's run the cycle. So maybe we had an environmental factor that it will be climate change, and maybe this will be the cost. And the risk will be, because until here, climate change is so general and so broad that doesn't help me at all. And that's when I saw in a risk heat map, like the risk is climate change. So give me a little bit more information, because how can you address the climate change risk? You need the onion strategy of layering the risk, right? So maybe the risk will be increased frequency and severity of extreme weather events. That's one, because again, from climate change, you can have plenty of risks. And then, okay, what happened with this risk? Will have a consequence. So maybe this specific risk will have consequence 1, damage to infrastructure. Consequence 2 will be supply chain disruption. And again, we'll have the layer onion. So the best way, and again, this is more of risk assessment or risk identification, is to have, okay, what can really happen to your company if that risk? It's not just the climate change, but this definitely will affect the processes of the company, because in the context of operational risk management. So maybe the first consequences will impact the production process. The second consequence maybe impact the distribution process. So until here, I have the risk assessment and identification. Okay, so what can we do for controls to mitigate the specific risk? So maybe we have create 2 controls for the first one. So alarm before storms will be What do you think this control will be? Will be preventive or detective? You can put it in the chat. And there are some of you that are put into host, but you should put into to host and to everyone in order that everyone can see. And another control maybe will be a waterproof barrier. What category control do you think it is, the waterproof barrier? It is preventive, corrective, or detective? And maybe an event, a risk event happen for this specific example, like a flood because of a storm on February 20th, and the loss will be $1,500. So maybe you, for a specific risk and a specific consequence, you can have a list of events that are happening in the company. Maybe event 1, event 2, event 3, and as many things. So if you have plenty of events of this specific risks or consequence, maybe you need to reassess the risk, and maybe originally you put that this risk will be unlikely, but if you have this risk happening twice a week, maybe you need to put very likely, right? And maybe you need, after that, what is the role of the action plan? So maybe I need to create an action plan that can touch the processes, the control, the risks, and event from happening, because it's wider. So maybe we need to have an extreme weather mitigation plan in order to mitigate this specific risk from happening, even if I have the controls. So this is an example. And remember the tips. And okay, in this example of extreme weather mitigation plan, okay, we will have an objective to reduce the impact of extreme weather events of an organization operation. I said, so what will be the objective of the action plan? So remember, we said that the action plan is a set of activities designed to address particular risk and outline what needs to be done, who is responsible, and when it should be done. So, first step will be risk assessment and monitoring. We will conduct a thorough assessment of our vulnerability to different types of extreme weather events, considering geographical location, historical data, and climate projections. We establish a system for ongoing monitoring and analysis of weather patterns and forecasts to anticipate potential risks. So look that even in this definition of action plan, contain ideas for controls. But again, the action plan is wider. 2, infrastructure and asset protection. So identify critical infrastructure, facilities, and assets that are vulnerable to extreme weather events, such as floods, storm, or heat waves. Implement protective measures such as flood barriers, storm shutters, reinforced roofs, and landscaping strategies to minimize damage. 3, emergency preparedness and response. So look that, okay, the last one were more preventive. Now it's like in the actual event from happening, develop comprehensive emergency response plans tailored to different types of extreme weather scenarios, conduct regular drills and simulation to test the effectiveness of emergency response. 4, business continuity planning, establish a contingency plan to ensure continuity of critical operations. 5, community engagement and approach, engage with local communities, government agencies, and other stakeholders to share information about potential risks associated with extreme weather. And 6, continuous improvement and adaptation. So this is a specific example of what the role of an action plan to mitigate a risk. And that will be the risk workflow. So we have the controls to mitigate, but we also have action plans. So we need to see this in action because, okay, maybe you can do this in spreadsheets, but will be very difficult it will be very difficult to associate a specific control to mitigate 10% or 50% a risk. So that's why a risk management software exists, to help you connect all this workflow, this risk management cycle. So let's gonna show you about Pirani. All of you already know that Pirani is ranked in G2 as the leader of operational risk management globally. And we also have the best usability, the easiest to use, the best results, best meet requirements, best estimated ROI. So you can also visit our G2 profile to read the verified reviews. So let's go to see this specific example in a risk management software. So remember, in Pirani, we have a dashboard that looks something like this. We're gonna have the risk heat map that in this specific example have 5x5 settings, the yellow, green, orange, and red area, and all where are my risks located. We can see that we have 10 rigs in the red area, and we have the list of how many processes do I have in this specific company, how many controls, how many action plans, how many rigs, how many events are actually happening, and assessments. So remember that. Let's try to translate the example that we saw of climate change. So maybe I have all the list of my processes like deliver food, legal, technology, administrative, sales, accounts, marketing. We can create as many processes that I have in my company that will be affected by the risks from happening, and give me an idea of, okay, what are the actual operations can be affected. And then we can list all the risks. So in this, we have, look, that we have here, we created the risk of increased frequency and severity of extreme weather. Let's go back to try to translate the specific example. So remember, you can, in this specific case, you can write the risk as your methodology says. So some companies just put a specific risk with all the description here, or maybe if you want to, you can customize. Okay, this specific risk will have the cost of climate change and the consequence of damage to infrastructure, to climate change disruption. Yeah, so, but you can just put all the description if you want. And in this example, we're gonna have the impact at the livelihood of this risk. In this case, is serious, the impact, and unlikely, the likelihood. So this gives me a location in the yellow area of the inherent risks. We can have add evidence. We can, in this specific case, okay, what we're gonna do with this specific risk? We're gonna transfer, we're gonna accept, we're gonna mitigate. Let's put mitigate. And this is optional. Okay, will be the pestle source. This is just in my methodology, is like the environmental source. And then we can associate this specific risk with processes. Like we said that it can impact production and distribution. I don't know if I have a distribution processes in this specific case. Put it deliver food, for example. That maybe that can be a distribution, production. Let's say like. Yeah, let's go with that. Of course, I can create the process of production if I have to. And then I know that this specific risk can impact the distribution, and then I can associate controls in order to mitigate. So let's gonna see what controls do I have. So that right now we have quarterly financial reviews, check payroll, compliance policies, annual inventory programming, duplicity, alerts. So maybe we don't have any. So maybe we need to create the control. So let's go back here. It's telling me that I need to do something. Okay. So and remember, this is the inherent risk today will be high, and the residual risk is high. Why? Because we haven't created any control to mitigate this risk from happening. Like, for example, in this, that the inherent risk was high, and because of having controls, it is medium. So let's go back to controls and create a control. So we're going to create, and as you can see, all the controls that are here give me the strain of the effectiveness of this control. So I'm going to create a control for alarm before storm. Maybe that will be, so create the control. So alarm before storm. And I need to set the strain of this control. So I'm gonna, in Pirani, we give you some control questions to have that rating. So this control will be corrective, detective, or preventive. So based on this response, we're gonna have a point or rating. So definitely will be better if it's preventive because anticipate likelihood in situations. So maybe detective because it won't prevent the risk from happening. And the type of execution will be manual, combined, or automatic. So let's say it will be automatic because it's connected to the weather channel. I don't know. This control is executed repeatedly. Yes, it's not once in a lifetime. Because if it is not, will be weaker. Look, and you can see the rating in real time. It is documented partially, maybe. Is there any evidence? Let's say that yes. Is there an assigned control owner? These are responsible in the company for this specific control. Okay, yes. And in execution, these have been events presented. Not yet. Is the control design effective? Maybe yes. Is the evidence effective? Yes. But so in this specific rating, based on the questions that I answered, that gives me that is a strong control. And I can put also a description. Maybe I want to add an evidence, maybe the contract, maybe I don't know the link of the alarm before storm. So and then I can associate or link this specific control that I know is strong with a specific risk. So I know that, for example, the risk will be weather, oh my God, natural disaster, yeah, increased frequency and severity of weather events. So I will link this specific risks. So now it will gonna help you. Okay, this specific control will mitigate the impact of likelihood. What do you think? Remember that the name is alarm before storm. The likelihood will be, I don't know, will mitigate. The alarm will mitigate the what is the risk? The increase and severity of extreme weather. Maybe it will be mitigate the impact because maybe I gonna act according to because if I know that an event will happen, maybe I will be prepared, but the likelihood will be mitigated. So based on this information, I'm gonna have alarm before, and I know it will be strong. And then when I go back to the rigs, look that before that specific control is applied, now I have a residual risk of low. Of course, I put like strong and will mitigate 100%. That is not actually real, but you get the idea. So give me, okay, the inherent risk is high and the residual risk will be, the impact will be minor because I say so. But I always can adjust. Maybe, no. I shouldn't be that optimism. Maybe this will only impact at 50%. And maybe we have a need to have a layered controls. So maybe I need to associate another, like, for example, I don't know, training employees for this from happening. And maybe this will mitigate the impact as well. So I can put layer controls in order to mitigate this, and I'm gonna save changes, and again will be, so look that like I move the mitigation, and I say that it's not 100%, but a 50%. Now the residual risk is medium. So this will help you to have an understanding of the mitigation strategies. But again, the controls are not enough. So we need to, maybe another thing will be create an action plan. And remember, Anne is asking here the differentiation. That's a very good question. That's why I have this specific comparative table, and of what is the difference. So controls maybe are mechanisms that can be policies, procedures, processes.
Well, I think we have an interruption from this webinar. We apologize about that. And remember, I shared in the chat the link so you can try Pirani for free. We have a free plan when you can try every function that we have for us, for you guys, and I will send you right now again. And if you want to continue learning about risk management, I will leave the link about the Pirani Academy in the chat too. So if you have any questions during this webinar or in this final minutes, you can put in the chat. So I will give Alejandro the question and answers to your mails. Finally, if you want to collaborate to participate in the short survey that will appear when this meeting ends, this will help us a lot to continue learning and improving our webinars. So thank you so much for your time, and see you the next month.